It wasn't meant to be explosive. There were no hecklers, no applause signs, no raised voices waiting off camera. Just two women, two chairs, one notebook. For years, Meghan Markle had mastered confrontation by choosing her battlegrounds carefully. This time, she didn't because across from her sat Diane Sawyer, and Diane Sawyer never needed to raise her voice to make someone leave the room. The studio was quieter than Meghan expected. No warm-up chatter, no last-minute jokes from producers trying to soften the mood, just the faint hum of studio lights and the soft scratch of Diane Sawyer's pen as she closed her notebook and looked up. Meghan sat upright in her chair, legs crossed neatly, hands folded with practiced elegance, black blazer, white blouse, professional, controlled. She had done this before countless times, and she wore that confidence like armor. Diane smiled politely. Not warmly, not coldly either. Just enough to signal courtesy without invitation. "Thank you for being here," Diane said, her voice calm, almost gentle. "I know you've had a long day," Meghan nodded. "I think conversations like this are important," she replied, "especially when so much misinformation exists." Diane tilted her head slightly, acknowledging the phrase without commenting on it. She had heard it before, many times from many people. They sat for a beat, silence, deliberate and unhurried. So Diane continued, "You've spoken often about reclaiming your voice." Meghan's lips curved into a familiar smile. "Yes, for a long time I didn't feel I was allowed to speak openly." "Allowed," Diane repeated softly, as if tasting the word. Meghan didn't notice the pen pause. "You've described your experience as one of constant pressure," Diane went on. "Scrutiny, judgment, loss of agency." "That's right," Meghan said. "It was relentless." Diane nodded once. "And yet," she added, "you've been speaking publicly about it for several years now. Books, podcasts, interviews, documentaries." Meghan's posture stiffened just slightly. Not enough to be obvious, but enough for the camera to catch it. "I'm not sure what your point is," Meghan said carefully. "There isn't one yet," Diane replied. "I'm just listening." The word yet lingered longer than it should have. Meghan inhaled, exhaled. "Healing isn't linear," she said. "Just because I speak about it doesn't mean the wounds disappear." Diane offered a small nod. "Of course, I wonder, does repeating a story ever change the way it's received?" Meghan's smile faded a fraction. "Are you suggesting I shouldn't speak?" "No," Diane said quickly. "I'm asking whether the audience hears something new each time or whether they begin listening differently." The room felt smaller. Meghan shifted in her seat. "People project their own discomfort," she replied, "especially when a woman refuses to stay silent." Diane didn't challenge that. She simply flipped a page in her notebook. "You've spoken about institutional cruelty," Diane said. "About being isolated, unsupported." "Yes," Meghan said firmly. "That's my truth." Diane looked up. "Is it the only truth?" There it was. Meghan blinked. "I'm not sure I understand." Diane's tone didn't change. "In stories involving many people, truths tend to overlap. Sometimes they conflict." Meghan let out a soft laugh, polite, controlled. "With respect, Diane, I didn't come here to debate my lived experience." "And I didn't invite you to," Diane replied. "I invited you to explain it." Meghan's fingers tightened together. For the first time, she leaned forward. "I think there's a fine line between explanation and interrogation." "Is there?" Diane asked. "Or does that line move depending on who's asking?" The silence returned heavier now. Meghan's eyes flicked briefly toward the producers' side of the studio. Just a glance, but enough to suggest awareness, calculation. "I've faced enough skepticism," she said. "I don't need more of it disguised as curiosity." Diane folded her hands calmly in her lap. "Skepticism isn't always disbelief," she said. "Sometimes it's an invitation to clarity." Meghan shook her head. "That sounds nice in theory." "And in practice?" Diane asked. Meghan hesitated just for a moment. "I've been clear," she said. "Pain doesn't require permission to exist." Diane's expression softened, but her eyes didn't. "No," she agreed, "but narratives do shape power." The sentence landed harder than any accusation. Meghan straightened again, reclaiming her composure. "I'm here because people deserve to hear my side." "They have," Diane replied quietly. Many times the words were not harsh. That was the problem. Meghan inhaled sharply, then smiled again, whiter this time, but brittle. "Then perhaps," she said, "it's time they listen more carefully." Diane nodded once slowly. "That," she said, "is exactly what I'd like to do." The camera tightened its frame, and for the first time since the interview began, Meghan Markle looked less like a guest and more like someone being carefully, patiently cornered. The lights hadn't changed. The temperature in the room hadn't shifted. Yet something was unmistakably different. Meghan felt it before she could name it. Diane Sawyer didn't rush. She never did. She let silence do the work. The kind of silence that forces people to keep talking just to prove they still exist inside it. You've said, Diane began calmly, that you felt unheard. Meghan nodded repeatedly. And yet, Diane continued, your story has dominated headlines for years. Meghan's jaw tightened. Visibility doesn't equal understanding. No, Diane agreed, but repetition does invite scrutiny. Meghan leaned back, crossing her arms loosely, defensive but controlled. I'm sensing a pattern here, she said. Every question seems designed to imply exaggeration. Diane's eyes remained steady. I'm interested in consistency. Meghan exhaled sharply through her nose. My consistency is surviving. Diane nodded, then glanced briefly at her notes. In one interview, you described isolation so severe you had no one to turn to. Meghan stiffened. She recognized the phrasing. In another, Diane continued, you spoke about close friends, therapists, and a strong partnership. Meghan's smile vanished completely. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Of course not, Diane said, but language shapes perception. Meghan leaned forward now, her voice firmer. Are you policing how trauma is expressed? No, Diane replied evenly. I'm asking how the audience is meant to interpret it. Meghan's tone sharpened. I don't exist to make people comfortable with my pain. Diane didn't react. Then why return to it so often? The question landed like a blade wrapped in velvet. Meghan laughed once, short, incredulous. Because silence protects institutions, not people. Diane held her gaze, and visibility protects. Truth, Meghan said immediately. Diane tilted her head slightly. Whose? Meghan blinked. Mine, Diane waited. Only yours, she asked gently. The air felt heavier now, as if every word had weight. Meghan's fingers flexed against the armrest. I think this line of questioning assumes bad faith. No, Diane replied. It assumes complexity. Meghan shook her head. Complexity is often used to discredit women. And simplicity, Diane countered, can erase others. Meghan's voice rose for the first time, not loud, but sharp. I'm not responsible for how others feel about my truth. Diane nodded once. No, but public narratives rarely belong to one person alone. Meghan's eyes flashed. So now I'm being told to share ownership of my own life. I'm suggesting, Diane said calmly, that when stories involve families, institutions, and nations, they echo. Meghan scoffed. That sounds like a very convenient way to dilute accountability. Diane didn't flinch, or to widen it, a pause. Meghan leaned back again, crossing her legs this time. A reclaiming gesture. I've noticed something, she said coolly. When men speak repeatedly about hardship, they're called brave. When women do it, they're questioned. Diane's expression softened slightly. That double standard exists. Then why perpetuate it? Meghan pressed. I'm not, Diane replied. I'm examining narrative power. Meghan shook her head, frustration visible now. You're dissecting my experience like it's a case study because you presented it publicly, Diane said gently. And public stories invite public understanding. Meghan's lips pressed together. This feels less like understanding and more like skepticism. Sometimes, Diane said, they look similar. Meghan leaned forward again. I came here expecting fairness. And you have it, Diane said. Fairness includes difficult questions. Meghan laughed again, louder this time. This is exactly why people don't trust the media. Diane raised an eyebrow slightly. Because we ask, because you frame, Meghan shot back. You control tone, context, what's emphasized. Diane nodded. That's why I choose words carefully. Meghan gestured vaguely between them. Then choose better ones. Diane didn't respond immediately. She closed her notebook slowly, deliberately, and placed it beside her. Meghan, she said softly, do you believe your story will ever be finished? The question caught her off guard. I don't know, Meghan said after a beat. Healing doesn't have an end date, Diane nodded. Then perhaps the tension isn't about repetition. She paused. Perhaps it's about resolution. Meghan's eyes narrowed. What are you implying? I'm asking, Diane said evenly, whether this story moves forward or circles. The camera pulled slightly tighter. Meghan Markle did not answer immediately, and in that pause, something fragile, something carefully maintained began to crack. The silence after Diane's last question stretched longer than before. Meghan finally spoke, but her voice had changed. You're framing this as a loop, she said, as if I'm stuck. Diane didn't argue. She reached for the notebook again. I want to read something, she said calmly. Your words, not mine. Meghan's eyes flicked down, then back up. Go ahead. Anne adjusted her glasses. Interview March. You said I never wanted attention, I wanted privacy. Meghan nodded stiffly. 2 months later, Diane continued. You said sharing is the only way to break silence. Meghan exhaled. Both can be true. They can, Diane agreed, but the audience hears contradiction. Meghan leaned forward, her elbows now on her knees. The audience isn't living my life. No, Diane said, but they are listening. Meghan's jaw tightened. This feels like a cross-examination. Diane met her gaze. It's documentation. Meghan scoffed. That's a convenient word. Diane didn't react. She turned another page. Another quote, she said, "You describe the environment as emotionally unsafe." Meghan's fingers curled slightly. And yet, Diane continued, "You later describe moments of joy, laughter, connection." Meghan cut in. "Are you suggesting abuse must be constant to be real?" "No," Diane said evenly. "I'm suggesting clarity matters." Meghan straightened, her tone now sharp. "This is exactly what people do when they don't want to believe women." Diane paused. "Or when they want to understand timelines." Meghan shook her head. "You're reducing lived experience into bullet points." "I'm placing them in sequence," Diane replied. Meghan's voice rose, because sequence makes it easier to dismiss. Diane's voice remained steady, because sequence shows evolution. Meghan laughed, this time without humor or inconsistency. Diane tilted her head. "Which one do you believe it is?" Meghan stared at her. "I believe I've been remarkably patient." Diane didn't smile. "Patience doesn't eliminate accountability." The word hung there, accountability. Meghan repeated, incredulous. "For what?" "For impact," Diane said softly. Meghan leaned back hard into the chair. "So now I'm responsible for how my truth affects institutions that harmed me." "I'm asking," Diane replied, "whether the story allows space for others' truths." Meghan's eyes flashed. Those others had power. I didn't. And now, Diane asked. The question hit harder than the others. Meghan opened her mouth, then closed it. "I have a platform," she said finally, "earned through survival." Diane nodded. "Platforms amplify." Meghan snapped. "So does scrutiny." "Yes," Diane agreed. "That's the exchange." Meghan shook her head slowly. "This is exactly why I hesitate to sit down like this." "And yet you did," Diane said gently. Meghan leaned forward again, her voice colder now. "Because people like you shape perception whether I show up or not." Diane didn't deny it. "That's why this matters." Meghan gestured between them. "You're dissecting me as if I'm a concept." "I'm listening to you as a subject," Diane replied. Meghan laughed sharply. "That's not how it feels." "How does it feel?" Diane asked. "Like no answer will ever be enough," Meghan said. "Like the goalposts keep moving." Diane paused. "Then let me ask something simpler." She closed the notebook again. "If you could change one thing about how your story has been told," Meghan interrupted. "By whom?" Diane didn't flinch. "By you." Meghan froze. The studio felt smaller now, tighter. "I wouldn't change it," Meghan said at last, "because softening truth makes it palatable, and I'm not here to be palatable." Diane nodded slowly. "Then confrontation becomes inevitable." Meghan's voice sharpened. "Are you confronting me?" "I'm engaging you," Diane replied. "There's a difference." Meghan stood halfway up from her chair, then stopped herself, her hands clenched. "You keep saying engage," she said. "But this feels like containment." Diane met her eyes, or reflection. Meghan shook her head. "I don't recognize myself in this framing." "Sometimes," Diane said quietly, "mirrors are uncomfortable." Meghan stared at her, breathing shallow. "Now this interview," she said, "has crossed a line." Diane didn't respond immediately. "Which line?" she asked finally. Meghan didn't answer. She just looked away. And in that moment it was clear. The rupture wasn't coming. It was already here. The moment Meghan looked away, Diane didn't chase her. She waited. Not like a host waiting for a sound bite, like a person waiting for a decision. Meghan's gaze drifted to the small candle behind Diane, the framed black and white photo on the cabinet, the neat stack of books that looked too calm for what was happening in the room. The studio lights didn't change, the microphones didn't move, but something in Meghan's posture did, like a thread inside her had snapped, and the rest of her was pretending it hadn't. Diane spoke softly. "You said this interview crossed a line." Meghan's eyes returned sharp. "It did. I want to respect that," Diane said. "But I need to understand where the line is so people watching can understand it too." Meghan exhaled through her nose, a controlled release. "The line is when my pain becomes a product." Diane nodded once slowly. "That's fair, Meghan, and we're there." Diane didn't argue. She adjusted the notebook in her lap without looking down. "Then I'll ask one last question and you can decide if you want to answer it." Meghan's jaw flexed. "Go on." Diane's voice stayed even. "What would accountability look like for you if the roles were reversed?" Meghan blinked like the words didn't land at first. "What?" She said if, Diane repeated, someone accused you publicly of causing harm. Not intent, impact, and they had less power than you. "What would you do?" Meghan's lips parted. A small laugh escaped. Not amused, almost startled. "This is absurd. I'm not saying you caused harm," Diane said. "I'm asking you to define the standard you want the world to use when it evaluates stories with power attached." Meghan leaned forward, elbows pressing into her knees. I don't accept your premise, Diane. That's an answer. Meghan's voice rose a notch. No, it's not. It's you trying to corner me into admitting I'm responsible for things I didn't do. Diane didn't lift her tone. I'm trying to understand whether responsibility and victimhood can exist in the same story. Meghan froze. For the first time, her face didn't read like irritation. It read like offense. Pure, hot, and immediate. Did you just say victimhood? She asked, each syllable sharpened. Diane's expression didn't shift. I said the word because it's the word people use. I'm asking if you think it's possible for a person to be hurt and still have responsibilities. Meghan sat back as if the chair had betrayed her. You're doing it, she said. You're doing the thing, Diane. Which thing? Meghan's eyes widened, incredulous. The subtle undermining, the reasonable tone, the way you make the question sound neutral when it's actually loaded. Diane's voice stayed calm. Meghan, I'm not trying to know. Meghan cut in louder. You are. And you know exactly how this works. You smile with your eyes, you speak like it's compassion. But what you're doing is it's gaslighting. The word hit the room like a plate shattering. Diane's eyebrows lifted slightly. Not in anger, but in surprise. I'm not gaslighting you. Meghan leaned forward again. You're telling me my reality is inconsistent. My story is contradictory. And now you're saying responsibility belongs to me in the same breath as you use the language of victimhood. Diane's voice remained low, measured. I never said your reality wasn't real. I said clarity matters. Meghan's hands opened, palms up, then closed into fists. Clarity for who? Diane. For the public. Meghan's laugh was short and sharp. Ah, there it is. Diane's gaze held. People can empathize and still ask questions. Meghan, not like this, Diane. How then? Meghan's eyes flashed, with respect. Diane nodded slowly. I believe I have been respectful. Meghan's tone turned icy. Respect isn't just manners. Respect is believing someone when they tell you they were hurt. Diane, I do believe you were hurt. Meghan's voice rose again. Then stop treating it like a logic puzzle. Diane's face tightened just slightly, still controlled. This isn't a puzzle, it's an interview. Meghan stared at her, breathing quicker now. No, this is a performance. Diane's voice softened. Meghan. Meghan cut her off, the politeness gone completely. I'm not going to sit here and be made into a headline. Diane didn't move. I'm not making you into a headline. Meghan pointed slightly, not aggressive but unmistakable. Yes, you are. And you're doing it with the tone that makes people believe you're the reasonable one no matter what I say. Diane's eyes narrowed in focus, not hostility. Then say what you want to say clearly right now. No framing, no layers, just your words. That invitation, simple, direct, should have lowered the temperature. It didn't because Meghan took it as permission. She sat up straighter, shoulders squared, voice crisp and cutting. Fine, she said. Here's what I want to say. She looked straight at Diane like she was speaking to someone who'd been taking notes on her life for years. You don't get to ask me to prove my pain. Diane started to respond. Meghan raised her hand. No, let me finish. The room suddenly felt like it belonged to Meghan alone. You don't get to tell me my truth needs clarity so strangers can feel comfortable consuming it. Diane's mouth pressed into a thin line, listening. And you don't get to sit there with a notebook, Meghan continued, like the person who lived it is less credible than the person who writes it down. Diane's eyes remained steady. I'm listening. Meghan's voice sharpened. You're collecting, Diane. That's your interpretation. Meghan snapped. Because that's what it is, a beat. Then Diane said something that wasn't cruel, but was firm enough to tilt the entire exchange. Meghan, you are not powerless in this room. Meghan went still. Say that again, she said quietly. Diane didn't hesitate. You are not powerless in this room. Meghan stared as if the air had changed density. That sentence so simple was the wrong one, because Meghan had built her entire stance on one sacred foundation that she had been unheard, unsupported, cornered by institutions, denied agency. And now Diane, calm, professional, unshaken, had just removed the oxygen from that foundation. Meghan's voice rose like a wave. You think power is a microphone, Diane replied. Power is influence, its platform, it's the ability to shape how millions see a story. Meghan's laugh turned bitter. I didn't ask for that, Diane, but you have it. Meghan leaned forward hard. And you're using that fact to invalidate what happened to me. Diane shook her head. No, I'm saying the story has two parts. The pain and the responsibility. That comes after. Meghan's eyes flashed. Responsibility to whom? Diane, to the truth. Meghan's voice cracked, not with sadness, with fury. I am the truth. The silence after that was brutal. Not dramatic TV silence, real silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. Diane didn't raise her voice. She didn't fight back. She just asked very quietly. Then why are you so afraid of questions? Meghan's breath hitched. Her eyes widened. For a split second, something vulnerable flickered across her face. Shock, maybe, or the realization that she'd walked into a room she couldn't control the way she wanted. Then it vanished. The mask returned, and behind it, contempt. Meghan stood up. Not slowly, not theatrically, just stood. Her chair made a small sound against the carpet. Diane looked up at her, still seated. Meghan. Meghan leaned down slightly, voice low but lethal. You wanted clarity. Here it is. She turned toward the camera position. Even though this was framed like an intimate interview, she knew where the lens lived. She always knew. This, she said, is why people stop speaking. Diane rose halfway instinctively, then stopped, choosing not to chase. Meghan, she said, now firmer. If you walk out, that's your choice, but don't say I didn't give you room to speak. Meghan turned back, eyes cold. Room, you gave me a cage and called it a conversation. Diane's voice stayed calm. Then I'm sorry you experienced it that way. Meghan's smile was brief and sharp. Of course you are. She stepped toward the edge of the set. A producer's shadow moved in the background, barely visible, but there, a quiet panic in a place that was built to look calm. Diane spoke one last time, voice steady, controlled, professional. This interview ends here, she said. Thank you for coming. Meghan paused, hand hovering near the exit. Then she said without looking back, don't ever mistake my silence for defeat. And she walked out. The door didn't slam. That would have been too easy. It clicked shut with a soft, final sound. Diane stood there for a second, staring at the empty space where Meghan had been. She exhaled, slow, controlled. Then she looked directly at the camera. Sometimes, she said quietly, the truth doesn't leave with the person who tells it. She closed her notebook. And sometimes, she added, the questions are the story. Cut to black. If you felt that tension through the screen, hit like. And if you want more high-stakes, dramatic celebrity confrontations, subscribe right now. Comment below. Was Meghan right to walk out?